Hello, everyone. As normal, I am going to be, or as a yearly tradition now, I'm going to be presenting my theory for the upcoming first robotics competition game. This year's game is titled Reefscape. As always, we hardly know anything about the game until we see it released at kickoff tomorrow, other than the teaser and a few notes about the logistics of the game that have been posted in the first community blog. So essentially, this game is probably going to look nothing like the actual Reefscape. But this is my best guess and how I would design the game if I made it. So, without further ado, this is what I've designed and predicted. So, the robots are thematically based underwater on the seabed floor, and their job is to refurbish and return health to the coral reefs below. And they do that by placing these little coral-like balls called coral in these reef pods, and placing these stems atop the reef pods to aid with the growth of the coral. Now, each alliance has 3 pods, and each pod has 4 spots for coral and 10 spots for stems. And you'll notice that they're kind of divided into segments. So each, you can see here, these 3 spots for stems correspond to a single bay for coral. These 2 spots correspond to a single bay, and we'll get more into that later. But essentially, when corals are placed below stems, they earn additional points. And a robot can control up to 1 stem and 1 coral at the same time. So, we have the low pod, the mid pod, and the high pod each alliance has. Low pod, coral can be rolled right off the floor into this lower segment, and stems can be placed, not a lot of height that needs to be covered, into the top. High reef pod, essentially the same as the low reef pod, just everything's higher up. You have to pick up the coral to put them in these elevated bays, and the spots for stems are even higher up. And then the mid pod is kind of a hybrid between the two. Coral can be rolled right from the floor into the pod, much like the lower pod, but the height is the same for stems for the higher pod. And you also, each one has 2 April tags, which they're mounted on these pieces of polycarbonate that allows them actually to be seen from both directions, which gives kind of a wider range of using the April tags. So, how points work is every, I'll start with teleop. Every stem scored in one of these slots in a pod, regardless of which pod it is, scores 5 points, always. Corals, on the other hand, will score 2 points plus the amount of, plus 3 points per stem that corresponds to the segment they're in. For example, if I have a coral in this bay on its own, 2 points. If I have a coral and 1 stem above it, that's 2 points plus 3 per the amount of corresponding stems. So 2 for the coral, and then plus 3 for the stem above it, which makes 5. And then an additional 5 points for the stem being placed on its own. So that would be a total of 10 points. So the more points, you score more points, the more stems you have above a single coral. And at most, you can score 3 above a coral. Some bays, you can only score 2 above. Let's see. A robot can control 1 coral and 1 stem at a time, although they can't do 2 of the same. And then the way the endgame functions is robots climb up this little underwater mountain called a guyot, which is simply a word for an underwater seamount with a flat top, like this looks like. And they score points based on if they're just parked atop here, or if they're able to cross this gap known as the trench. And this was a kind of a twist on the endgame I'd been thinking about for a while. They have to cross over this to get the max amount of points. This area down here is called the reef, and it is kind of a sacred zone where you don't want to trample the coral. So robots can still earn some points if they just go right up here and then were to climb, like in 2019, right onto the top. That's called an unprotected climb because it damages the coral below. So they get some points for that. They get 12 points for doing a climb like that. But if they're able to get on top of here without entering this zone to climb, then they get a full 30 points for a protected climb. So to get a full points for a protective climb, teams have to either get on top of this platform, either by going up this way or climbing up the 20-degree ramp, and then going over the trench. And if a robot touches the trench, then that counts as an unprotected climb. So 30 points for a protective climb, 12 points for any climbs unprotected, i.e. they climb to this level of the last two platforms, but via damaging the coral or the wall below, so like just climbing right over the side. Or if they park just like on this platform and above, they get 5 points. And I have a ranking point for this. You get, let's see. If you have 36 trench points, at least, you get 1 ranking point. So that means you either need 3 robots up via unprotected climbs, 1 up with a protected climb, and 1 up with an unprotected climb, or you need just 1 up with a protective climb and then 2 parks, which is going to be difficult to fit 2 robots up here. Now, something you might also notice is this little structure behind the Guyot, this ramp that leads down to the trench. This was an opportunity. This is still technically part of the trench. To allow teams to introduce game pieces during the autonomous period, which is kind of a new element I wanted to add to the game this year that we don't typically see a lot of. So typically after autonomous, human players then get to place game pieces on, but no, this adds a little more interesting flair to the game. So teams can roll these corals down this slide, and they will kind of bounce off the trench and onto the field. And that kind of gives robots a bit more of a challenge if they want to score more points during autonomous. There already are some game pieces on the field before the match starts, which they can use in autonomous. There are corals placed here, here, and here, and stems placed here, here, and here. And then there are also these white lines. Teams can choose to put the remaining 3 corals that they have, the remaining 3 stems they have anywhere on these lines. And each robot can preload a coral or a stem. Any of those game pieces not preloaded starts over here in the Alliance Station, and during the match, they can be entered onto the field. It doesn't have to be during the autonomous, but it might be wise to. Down this path or down this path, the bottom path, or the bottom chute is meant for stems to be rolled down, and they will continue rolling onto the field, and coral to roll down into. The corals aren't exactly spheres, by the way. They're kind of these puffy, like, balls with little nubs on the side of them. They're actually inspired by a type of ball that Gopher Sports makes called nubs balls, I think. Anyways, let's go over to the loading station, which I call the lab. And each alliance has one opposite to their side of the field, where the human players are. And you'll notice that there is no way for corals to be entered through the lab. All corals either start on the field or can be entered during autonomous. How this works is each lab has 14 stems, no matter what, and human players can place them into these slots and then push this little mechanism forward, and that slowly drops the stem onto this little platform that robots have bumper clearance underneath, and they can pick that up. And this platform is, I believe, 3 inches higher than the surface of the low pod. And each lab also has 2 individual April tags above where the stems are placed. Let's see, stuff I haven't mentioned. You'll notice that one of the corals is purple. And the reason for that is this is kind of an opportunity to get a cooperation point like we had in Crescendo. If both alliances can score this coral with all stems in the pod above it scored as well. So if like it's scored into this pod and both stems are scored, and both alliances do that, they score a cooperation point, which helps them rank further in the competition. But it also lowers a ranking point. That ranking point being that teams get a ranking point if they fill one complete pod and then fill another pod either completely with coral or completely with stems. So that ranking point would be one pod completely filled, stems and coral, and then another pod either all stems are placed or at least all corals are placed. If both alliances score the cooperation bonus, that gets rid of that second need for that ranking point. So then the ranking point is diminished to just having to fill one pod completely. It lowers the threshold, essentially. In playoff matches, these don't do anything. They can even be replaced with green coral to make it simpler. Something I haven't mentioned is if you were to count up all the stems per alliance, there's 23, and there's 9 coral per alliance. And if you count up the number of bays and slots for stems to be placed, you'll notice that you can't fill all 3 pods at the same time. One of the twists for this game that I kind of designed is once a pod is completely filled with stems and coral, that pod enters what is called a cleansing mode, and the little LED down here will change color. And that simply means teams now have to empty stuff out of the pod. They have to take the coral out, and they have to take the stems out from the top, and they can move it to other pods. And when that's happening, all points they previously scored from placing that stuff in the pod, those are all saved. They can't be taken away now once the pod is completed. Teams get, 12 points for completing a pod, in addition to all the points they score down here. And then they have to move the corals and stems to other pods. Once a pod is in cleansing mode, where you can start taking stuff out of it, you cannot start scoring in that pod again until both other pods are filled. So only one pod can be in cleansing mode at a time. And the other pods will always be in supplying mode, which means you get points for putting them in. If you put a stem in here, 5 points. Take it out, those 5 points go away. But if the whole pod is filled, then those points are all saved. You get 12 points for filling the pod, and then you can take that out without having to worry about losing points and move it to another pod. Protected areas. This whole sector of the floor, each alliance has one. That's partially protected from opponent robots. Same with the area in front of the lab. Let's see, what else have I not mentioned? During Autonomous, each coral scored adds an additional 5 points. That is again scored, and they're like, so a coral scored in Autonomous is 5 points, and then it's scored again in Teleop if it's still there. So essentially, it's double points overall. A stem is also worth 5 points. Stem and coral both get an additional 5-point bonus for being scored in Autonomous. Moving outside, completely clearing this robot zone that the robots start in, that scores 5 points per robot. Let's see. Robots start, I think I mentioned this, either against their alliance wall or against the Guyot. I think that's pretty much it. I can show kind of a closer view on some of the pods. Coral can be rolled up into these bays, or some of these bays have like little slots in them where the coral can be placed that way. And this kind of allows strategy to evolve so that robots are dragging coral with them and placing stems at the same time to optimize time, because a robot can control both up to one stem and one coral at the same time. You can't cross the white line during Autonomous and stuff like that. Normal stuff. I think that's all pretty much about that game. So place stems and coral in pods. When a pod fills up, move them to other places, and then earn endgame points by climbing up onto the Guyo and getting extra points if you're able to do it by bridging this trench. Also, a few minor things. Cable protectors. This is how the pods get power, so the little lights can light up to let teams know when the pods are filled or not. Two go to these pods, and then one goes through this pod and to the far out mid pod. Yeah, that is essentially the structure of the game. And it will probably look much different like this in the actual game, but this is just my theory. Uh, and I'm probably going to add a whole like rules section later on, but I was really running short on time and I wanted to at least get like kind of my general explanation of this game out before kickoff happened. And that's about it. So I hope you all have a great kickoff and an amazing season with Reefscape that will probably not look like this. But this is just my design. Thanks for watching.